Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Late Show. This is your host, Young Brando, live from Los Angeles. I do apologize that I'm a little late than my usual time. And yesterday I had a very important meeting, actually, for dinner, which will have something to do with this channel in the future. So I can't wait to announce it to you, but it's not time yet. We'll have to wait until everything is finalized. So let's take, put a cap on that for now. But I will get back to you on it. It's going to be great. It's going to be a fantastic event, and I look forward to sharing it with you in due time. Today we're going to do something slightly different, although it is entirely in the realm of things that I do on this channel. On the one hand, of course, we do a lot of auction previews. We do a lot of work in advance of the auctions to take a closer look at as many lots as we can, thinking about how particular kinds of brands and models perform over long term. We make observations based on that, even as we keep learning, of course, about the collectability, desirability, and most importantly, history and horological detail about all these watches that we look at. And once every so often, we also go back to these auction results to stake out some outliers, to try to see also, of course, general trends, but usually to focus on watches that have performed beyond expectations, or that have performed perhaps in a way that was not expected at all. Watches, for example, that did not sell. You will remember, as a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, from a few months ago, the in Eichen Zurich auction based on FP Jaune exclusively. And you remember from about 13 lots, the great majority of them had not sold. And that was largely because the estimates were perhaps overly optimistic. They were largely based on how these pieces were trending in the post-pandemic craze, which has died down significantly. We can, of course, find geopolitical reasons for that. We can certainly find macroeconomic reasons for that, but that might prove too much of a digression, too much of a distraction for this current episode. What we are going to do is to look at the fall season in Geneva, which of course is in many ways a litmus test for the industry at large. And we're going to do that in a way through the lens of the auction preview that Ben Clymer did with his colleagues at Hodinkee, namely Tony Traina and Rich Forden. And that is also something we do on this channel quite often. As you know, a lot of times I do comment extensively on the content of the more recognizable, quote-unquote, journalistic outlets for the world of watches. At times, we also go meta, and this will be one of those instances because I think it's quite significant that Ben Clymer made a strong return on the scene, that he became more visible again at Hodinkee. And we're going to try to make sense of that. We're going to try to make sense of what it means for him to reintroduce the so-called Hodinkee Radio as Clymer Presents, as a series of podcasts. So we are not going to necessarily pour through every single thing that was said in that episode 5 of Clymer Presents, but we're going to try to understand what it means for Clymer and friends to do an auction preview episode. Quick kind of background for what has been going on at Hodinkee for the last 5 years. Now, almost 3 years ago, Hodinkee actually raised about $40 million in a Series B funding led by TCG, LVMH Luxury Ventures, Tom Brady, John Mayer. I think Google Ventures was also a partner in this consortium. And essentially, they sold a significant stake, what amounts to 40% of their $100 million valuation at the time. And it meant a couple of things in terms of the executive level, in terms of the shuffling the company experienced at that level. Clymer became suddenly founder and executive chairman, this no longer the CEO. And in fact, I think right around this time, either right away or right after, he also took a sabbatical, which lasted for quite a while. I think he returned sometime last year, I want to say. But he took some significant time off, in fact, from Hodinkee, where he was nowhere to be seen. And I'm not, this is not a conspiracy theory, right? I'm not trying to say he was doing this or that in the background. I think it was mostly him enjoying the fruits of his labor, taking some time, with his family, probably. None of my business. But anyway, this brings us back to the moment today in 2023, where he seems to be finally coming back on board at Hodinkee with full capacity. Of course, he has become visible again since 2022, but I think there is something of a concerted effort to find in Clymer again, perhaps that lightning in a bottle feeling and energy that Hodinkee had more than a decade ago now, when it first started off as a personal blog of exactly Clymer. Of course, this transformation in Hodinkee's makeup, in their financial makeup, in their executive makeup, meant a lot of different things to many people, to many of us who are more nerdy, more horologically inclined. It really meant, to put it in the most casual way possible, it really meant they fell off. But more significantly, it generally meant that they have become a magazine in the most traditional sense that you can imagine, right? One of the limitations of print magazines, increasingly as print started falling out of favor, is the fact that they are essentially content generated by advertisers or for advertisers. And we're not only talking about pages and pages of advertisements that such print magazines take on, but that every single page, in fact, every single editorial content they generate and put on their pages is by definition funded by some part of the industry, that it ultimately serves the needs, the wants, and the goals of that industry. Now, of course, again, this is nothing particularly dirty, but it has become clear to me, and this is not only limited to LVMH group brands, that a lot of Hodinkij's content over the years has become has blurred the distinction between advertorial and editorial, right? It's very hard to find what separates genuine, disinterested content from content that is actually trying to sell you something. And that's become very egregious with a lot of the special areas of focus that a lot of Hodinkij's readers, a lot of their audience had come to genuinely appreciate. Talking watches, for example, right? Talking watches, if you look at the last few episodes, beyond my particular criticism or dislike of whatever watches were presented or the conversational tone, you look at the episode that was done with Adam Levine, between Ben Clymer and Adam Levine, and it doesn't take a genius or a detective to realize that entire thing was put together for the express purpose of putting Artisan de Genève under spotlight, right? It shouldn't surprise that the release of that particular episode happened at the exact same time as Artisan de Genève released and revealed the so-called neon for Adam Levine, which is this sort of one-of-a-kind, personalized, modern Daytona that they did for the I don't even know. By the way, this looks extremely cool, of course, when you wear a loop as a choker. That means that you know so much about horology that you can't even begin to squeeze into a single episode. Of course, skeptics have told me, well, what are you talking about? This is a personalized watch. This is a one-of-a-kind. It's not like they made this in a series or whatever else. But you have to understand, of course, that the whole effort was to, in fact, have people take a look at Artisan de Genève and start, in fact, ordering their own customized, personalized, quote-unquote, bespoke pieces from them, and sharing into that experience that, of course, celebrities such as Adam Levine share. Now, this was one thing, of course. The other thing that the other episode that followed right after this was a Talking Watches that, in fact, seemed to introduce a new format, because with Talking Watches at Hodinkee, if it's not necessarily Ben Clymer, it's almost always someone from the Hodinkee team, someone from the more horologically inclined conversationalist at Hodinkee, who host one of the people that they invite in for the conversation, to talk about at least some select pieces from their collection. And suddenly, of course, we were left with John Mayer and Ed Sheeran. Of course, John Mayer has written for Hodinkee before. Of course, John Mayer belongs to Hodinkee specifically, precisely through the process that I've just described. He is one of the major investors in the whole venture. You might even call him, in a certain sense, for that reason, Ben Clymer's boss, even though he holds no such title. But you could certainly sense the awkward energy in that room, where these two guys were sitting in front of the camera, and members of the Hodinkee team, including Ben Clymer, were a captive audience, holed up in a corner of the room, or of the studio, rather, talking about watches. Now, again, I don't want to really delve into criticizing the content much, but I just want to, again, signal, underline, emphasize the fact that this whole conversation meant absolutely nothing, right? I'm sorry, there were a few interesting watches. I learned a lot about what John Mayer actually knows or doesn't know by the sheer surprise on his face of hearing Roger Smith, the proper name, for the first time, seemingly. He had no idea about who Roger Smith was, possibly about who George Daniels was either, before Ed Sheeran showed him his Roger Smith watch. That was interesting. Not a shocker for me, but to those who pay attention, that should tell you something about John Mayer and his espoused affected knowledge about watches. But what really irritated me about this episode was the fact that it was basically structured around selling you a shitter watch, a G-Shock, which was a special edition, and which is this yellow watch lying on the table, right? It's so strange that whole effort, to me, is absolute cringe. That these people could sit around the table and talk about watches that really retail already for hundreds of thousands of dollars and go for sometimes millions of dollars on the secondary market, and try to convince you that a G-Shock is just as cool. And not only that, but you should, in fact, buy the G-Shock that they are trying to sell you. I mean, it's just such a clusterfuck of disingenuous marketing that it sickens me. But anyways, I think they have gotten enough. Reactions to this kind of content. They have gotten enough criticisms about turning every single piece of their website into some sort of advertorial, that Ben Clymer had to announce this new series, Ben Clymer Presents, saying, we have been listening, we have been trying to understand what kind of content you exactly want, and I'm going to give you this series of podcasts, these regularly scheduled programming to attend to your horological needs. So that's important to note, right? Ben Clymer supposedly presents you within Hodinkee and Oasis. That's supposed to be a return to form. It's supposed to go back once again to the basics. It's supposed to take you back to that time where Hodinkee gives you actual horological content that is not trying to sell you something at the same time. So with that rant being ended, we can go back to that particular episode, which is episode 5 of Talking Watches. Episode 5 of Ben Clymer Presents. And in fact, I was actually asked to talk about specifically this particular episode by a member of the audience, because he made the shrewd observation that Ben Clymer is trying to become a tastemaker, as he put it. And I went back to tell him, well, that's what he always wanted to be, and that's what he was. That's why. That's what he was in an important sense before Hodinkee became so commercialized. And again, I think beyond anything else, I really consider this whole series, and specifically this fall auction episode, in a way back to basics for Ben Clymer. And I did actually enjoy it, even though I didn't necessarily learn much of anything in terms of the content. I do need to again underline the fact that Hodinkee doesn't necessarily have it easy at this point in time. I think they have laid off about a fifth of their employees just in September. So they are in dire need of reinvention and restructuring. So it's about time they return to actually talking about watches rather than trying to sell them. And again, you understand quite a lot about who they put in the CEO position. I'm trying to. I took a note of this earlier when that cash injection happened from LVMH Ventures, Tom Brady, John Mayer, Google Ventures, so on and so forth. They brought Toby Bateman as the CEO, and Toby Bateman was the managing director of the men's luxury e-commerce site, Mr. Porter. Right? The CEO didn't necessarily come from within the watch industry. He came with the specific purpose, with the express intent of turning Hodinkee into an e-commerce site. And the current CEO, I think his name is Jeffrey Fowler. Yes. Jeffrey Fowler also came from Farfetch, which is, once again, it's a luxury e-commerce and luxury resale also e-commerce website. I think he did have some sort of role in Tag Heuer in a bygone time, but that was also pretty much a marketing role. So again, I went back to the rant once more, so I do apologize, but please do realize that as much as I appreciate this return to form, as much as I appreciate Ben Clymer trying to take charge again of what was his product, his vision, I also want to emphasize that Hodinkee is an e-commerce website, right? And that's something that should always be on the back of your mind whenever you are reading any content by them. They are trying to sell you something with every single sentence. There's nothing more profound than that is going on behind the scenes. That they're lost. That's all I'm going to say. When it comes to the full auction analysis, I think they were a little too gingerly for my taste in trying to assess the state of the market as we talk about on this channel. They kept repeating that the prices have been stabilizing, and that was supposedly borne out by the facts and quote-unquote data that was presented to them by Chrono24, or for that matter, by their own experience selling vintage pieces, selling pre-owned watches. And that's simply not true, right? And that's, as I mentioned before, that's not something that they would ever admit, because it would necessarily take away from their business. So one of the things they have said, though, towards the end of the episode, Rich Forden specifically, who is responsible precisely for selling pre-owned watches on Hodinkee, admitted that the frequency with which people ask about some of the most desired and aspirational vintage Rolex pieces has lessened significantly. And that's very important, I think. Even as I want to underline that the classics, whether we are talking about the generations of Rolex sports watches that are the usual suspects in the auction circuits, or Patek chronographs, perpetual calendar chronographs, perpetual calendars. These kinds of watches, I think, almost always serve as a better store of value, almost always have this evergreen status where, because of their iconic status, because of their lasting desirability, and because of the way they stood the test of time, they have, in terms of the specific market value, they have preserved, I think, much better than a lot of the watches that were much more speculated on, much more desired by those people who have entered the market in the last few years, and mostly as a result of the pandemic and post-pandemic craze. The other thing I wanted to note was, I think there was almost a programmatic attempt at going back to vintage Rolex for specifically this reason. And of course, also to the mainstays of Patek in this episode, which I highly recommend that you watch, precisely because these are really fail-safe options, right? If you actually know what you are getting, if you are either well educated on the kind of references that you're looking for, and you're willing to spend the time and the money to source the best example you can, or whether you have someone on your side who can do something like that for you, these are usually foolproof suggestions. And I was actually quite happy about the fact that they mostly stuck to those options. One watch that consistently came up was the reference 6062. There were a few different examples, but this can serve us to take a peek at what was perhaps the most controversial auction this last weekend. This is a 6062 triple calendar with moon phase indicator, vintage Rolex piece from early 50s. This particular example is in pink gold and has an early version of the Stelline dial, little stars, which of course refer to these 8 little stars that are part of the constellation which completes the hour markers on this watch. And the early version of this dial is distinguished by the fact that the lume plots are behind the star markers, whereas in later versions, they're actually on the stars as well. Lot 2051 of the Passion for Time auction of this November 6th at Christie's Geneva was also previously part of the Gordon Bethune collection, and it was sold not too long ago, but perhaps long ago enough, in 2019 by Philips at the Geneva Watch Auction 10 for 1,940,000 Swiss francs. And yesterday, this piece sold for 2,223,000 Swiss francs. And that brings us to something that no one could quite predict and no one was expecting about the Passion for Time collection. This collection, as you know, and as we have explored here, belonged to a Qatari entrepreneur and collector by the name Mohammed Zaman, who is one of the high-rolling collectors of our time. And when it was first presented, and in a way, along with the Oak collection that's coming up for sale also by Christie's in Hong Kong, The argument was that the buyer, the consigner, the collector, Mohammed Zaman, trusted this collection to Christie's because of Christie's previous success in selling these kinds of personal single owner collections, which is testified by the resounding success that they had last spring in selling Jean Todd's, last fall, selling Jean Todd's personal collection as legendary and unique watches on November 6th, 2022, for a total of almost 32 million Swiss francs. But there was another turn of the screw. There was another twist to the story of Passion for a Time, to the story of the Mohammed Zaman collection, because yesterday, the beginning of the auction was actually delayed for about 45 minutes. And when the auction actually started, there were two significant differences about the auction that were, of course, not part of the printed catalog. First of all, there was a guarantee, a third-party guarantee specifically, meaning that if any of these watches were not bought by the bidders at this auction, the person or the entity who provided the guarantee would be obliged to buy the watch, buy the lot at that minimum price. This is a strategy that is used in the world of art quite frequently, quite regularly, and it does certainly provide an incentive to these sorts of customers, these sorts of consigners such as Mohammed Zaman, who, of course, may have been experiencing this kind of second thoughts or even cold feet in consigning an entire collection that has been accumulated over the years, precisely in this auction circuit and at prices that were, in the example of some watches on this auction, multiple times the estimates that were provided in the catalog. So what happened was that someone from the luxury world, as it's described, someone who is familiar with the world of auctions, came in with an offer, with the offer of providing that third party guarantee. And that meant, according to a deal they signed actually at 10 a.m. on November 6th, the day of the sale, yesterday, Christie's had to increase the low estimates to the new guaranteed price. So that raised a few eyebrows, I think, when it was announced, because there were already doubts about this consignment. Again, these are all allegations. These are all rumors that have not been proven otherwise, that were not necessarily served to me with any sort of evidence, but I had heard previously about this auction that Christie's itself had provided a certain guarantee to Zaman to secure his consignment, to secure the sale of his collection, the Passion for Time collection. But then again, Christie's vehemently denies this, calling it fake news, and that they had to compete with other auction houses, and they have simply won it by gaining the trust of the consignor and with the estimates that they had pitched. Of course, those estimates clearly not being enough were replaced by the third-party guarantee deal, which meant that a lot of the watches that were sold actually sold on this auction, on the Passion for Time auction, quite close to the low estimates. And a lot of the watches that were sold apparently went to a mystery bidder with the paddle 1013. These watches included the famous Brando GMT, which I put on the thumbnail of my live stream today. Let me pull it up. It was an early lot, no? And this was a watch, as you might know, that sold for 1.9 million Swiss francs just a few years ago. And when it was first presented in the catalog, the pre-auction estimate was set between 1 to 2 million Swiss francs, which seemed pretty realistic, perhaps even as an example of wishful thinking, because as the guys were talking about in the auction preview of Clymer Presents, there's just not the same enthusiasm for these kinds of pieces, for vintage Rolex more broadly, but more specifically for watches such as this one that are sprinkled with stardust. In this case, allegedly the buyer was not Rolex, but the watch in fact sold for more than twice the amount that it sold for last time, for an amount in excess of 4.5 million in Swiss francs. Yeah, I was the mystery bidder. I'm back in the business. The Whiskey Reaper. Nice to see you, man. Truth over facts. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe at some point we will dive deeper into that kind of content, which, guys, I mean, again, from my standpoint, all of this might ring hollow, but before I started doing this channel on my own, before I started running live streams, it's I used to read these resources and do it uh, pretty enthusiastically, religiously, one might say. And no one is more disappointed by the fact that especially Hodinkian revolution has turned into pure marketing machinery. I mean, they don't do anything except advertorials and collaborations with friends, and that to me is actually very disappointing. First and foremost, because it feels like losing someone that you value first and foremost, and also because it's still presented to the reader in the same way, essentially as something that it isn't. It's presented as this sort of passionate and otherwise uh, financially disinterested knowledge, whereas all it is really uh, just marketing copy for either themselves or for the brands they represent, and ultimately it's pretty sickening, if you ask me. The one thing I want to say, because I highlighted this at the beginning, but I should emphasize it again, I'm mostly looking at outliers, and in this case, I'm defining outliers as watches that have been perhaps exceedingly successful. That's why I started with the 6062, the pink gold Stelline that previously belonged to the Gordon Bethune collection that sold as part of the Passion for Time. That's also why I looked at the Brando GMT, which people were expecting was going to sell possibly for significantly less than last time, which was almost 2 million in Swiss francs. But it actually ended up selling for, in fact, more than twice the amount that it sold for in 2019. And that's important, again, because before the third party guarantee situation took effect, before the third party guarantor came in and guaranteed these low price buys, the pre-auction estimate was 1 to 2 million Swiss francs. And suddenly it became 3,750,000 to 6.5 million Swiss francs. And it sold for somewhere in the middle of that, though much closer to the lower estimate, which was already guaranteed by the third party. And of course, by taking that risk, by biting that, the guarantor, I think, is already also given some share, some part of the fee when the watch, in fact, sells for higher than the lower estimate, and when the watch goes for someone else, some other bidder. So that to me is very interesting about this auction. but ultimately, I think it really exposes what, by and large, the auction world is. Again, for a lot of collectors who started really getting into watches in these last 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, a lot of the collectors who have been socialized into collecting watches online, and mainly collectors groups that have been formed online, these kinds of collectors, and again, this is nothing personal, and I think it won't really offend anyone when I say this. These kinds of collectors are have a very partial knowledge of the collectors market, precisely because they're socialized into the collecting community through these tight-knit groups where uh, themselves and a lot of their friends buy watches mostly through allocations via authorized dealers, sometimes from gray market dealers, and then sometimes they want to move on from a watch or two, which then becomes available perhaps to another collector within that same network, within that same tight-knit group, or perhaps it goes to the gray market dealer that a lot of these people in the group already deal with, and from that gray market dealer to another collector. So a lot of times watches get passed around, um, again, within a pretty uh, well-connected and relatively small network. So essentially, when people have that experience over and over again, they end up thinking that this is how the watch market works. It's all collectors like me, uh, maybe collectors who are, who have bigger coffers than I do, maybe collectors who are much more financially fortunate than I am. But ultimately, this is the dynamic. Even though when you start looking at the auction world, and when you start knowing a little more about how, especially the more profiteering kinds of gray market dealers actually operate, you get a very different image of the market. The global market of watches is largely sustained by transactions that happen between dealers, right? These people acquire watches at the other end of the world. Let's say we are talking about a US-based gray market dealer. They have connections on the continent, in the UK, let's say in Portugal, in Belgium, UK, etc. Through those connections, through backdoor deals, they acquire new watches from authorized dealers, um, which then get shipped across the ocean to the US and sold to unsuspecting collectors at a hefty profit. Uh, that's one part. The second part is, of course, the auction circuit, where, in fact, the public experience of auctions is a lot of times manipulated by allegedly manipulated, let's put it like this, by certain dealers who, in fact, take a watch, consign it with the auction house, and then have their friends and connections who are other dealers bid on that watch, and perhaps have another third party to compete with that bidder, and perhaps a few of their own clients whom they invite to bid on that watch. And it's almost always the similar kinds of watches that travel within one dealer, from one dealer to another, from one auction house to another, and as uh, in the rarefied airs of um, more collectible rare pieces, in fact, you will see that it is the same handful of watches that are bought more or less by the few dozen collectors whom everyone knows. And those collectors themselves are, of course, largely well-meaning, but they end up paying significantly more, of course, because they fall prey to these games where there are so many other people who are bidding on the watch with no real intention of even buying them. I mean, it's really something strange. But ultimately, when it comes to this particular ordeal, which I'm hesitant to call a charade, but that's another word that comes to mind. Essentially, what just happened was a private sale that was agreed between um, the owner of this collection, the single owner of this collection, and the so-called third party. And then we still had to go through the motions with the public auction, where these prices got advertised, where these pieces became part of the news cycle, and where with some of the prices realized, with some of the hammer prices achieved as part of this auction, we now have new and speculative and relatively healthy numbers for some of the more rarefied vintage or simply rare pieces, which don't really reflect the actual state of the market, which has fallen off quite significantly over the last 2 years almost now. Over the last year and a half, we can easily say. And we have been observing that that hits the hype watches the worst, but not exclusively, right? Basically, everything has by now fallen fallen off, dipped 20, 30, 40%. And even the brands, even the established independents, such as, of course, FP Jean, such as Kari Voutilainen, seem to have fallen off significantly from the absolute heights that they had achieved at the climax of the post-pandemic moment. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind. There's no, for me, there's no real sign that the market is stabilizing. All I see is these sorts of exceptional, well-preserved, relatively rare, if not unique pieces performing still quite well. All I see in the market is pieces falling and falling and falling in terms of their prices. If you want to run your own tests, Of course, you might say this is all anecdotal, but choose a dozen or two of your most aspirational collection. Go to Chrono 24, add either to your collection, but ideally to your notepad, 2 dozen watches that you would like to own if money were no object. Put those watches onto your notepad on Chrono 24 and check back on them month to month, maybe once towards the end of the year, once towards the end of January, and once at Valentine's Day, so to speak, once in February. And in the meantime, of course, the nice thing about Chrono 24, when you add things to your notepad, you can also tick off a specific box. Let me bring this up. You can also tick off a specific box where you would be notified when the prices dip, right? I was notified, for example, with this. Last time I talked extensively about pole routers, which was a few months ago, maybe 6 months by now. They were mostly trending around 5,000 for some nice examples. Now they're around 3.5 and less. This was a 3137, Breguet 3137. That's original asymmetrical dial design that Daniel Roth implemented, translated from Abraham Louis Breguet's pocket watch number 5. That was at 17K, dropped all the way down to 13, and someone already grabbed it. But anyway, once you turn on the notifications like this, you will keep receiving updates every time that the prices fall down significantly. And you can see here again at every single price point, right? Someone chops off 2,000, 1,000, 4,000, 3,000, 3,000, 500. Everything is falling. I mean, can you imagine just a few months ago, just at the beginning of the summer, can you imagine getting a Royal Oak Jumbo for less than 60,000? The time is now. 15202 was seriously creeping onto a universally 6-digit watch territory. It's now sub 60,000. There we go. It will continue to fall. Yeah, by the way, thank you, Maldives, for bringing this up. I wasn't planning to talk about it, but this is okay. My ad blockers don't allow me to show this page to you. That's completely all right. You guys remember one aspect of Rolex's acquisition of its long-standing partner and dealer, Bukhara, was about how Jörg Bukhara, who did not have any heirs, wanted to pass the brand on to perhaps hands that would respect the legacy he leaves behind. And it turns out actually his request his wish, his aspiration of leaving behind the family brand, the family business, to safekeeping with the best custodians. That was a very timely wish because he has actually passed away. I think I have another news source for this, as it happens, also in German. Yeah, it says Jörg Buchara is dead. This is how the great entrepreneur organized his imperium or his empire. This is the gentleman, this is the late Jörg Buchara, who has passed away apparently just last night. And perhaps in this context, the integration of Bukhara into Rolex in terms of its timing makes a lot more sense. Of course, Jörg Buchara was the kind of last representative of the family that stretches back to the 19th century. However, of course, he was already holding mostly a symbolic titular role in the company, where the executive structure still remains the same. And you would also perhaps recall that it was Rolex's promise that after their acquisition, that administrative structure will remain the same, at least for the time being. Yeah. That is Jörg Buchara, who has passed away. That's so harsh, man. Whiskey is forever young. The whiskey reaper is forever young. He's not gonna fall into that state. Don't worry. He's keeping himself active, so he should be fine. There are a few other lots that I want to talk about before we might take a look actually at further items, at further lots from the Passion for Time collection, because you may have noticed that there's an entire collection of watches that have been added to an online auction at Christie's. Let me pull that up. So that's also called, of course, Passion for Time. And it consists of a further 181, I want to say, lots. Let me see. No, 117 lots. Further selections from Mohammed Zaman's collection, some of which might represent oddballs, but others still quite significant. So we might, towards the end of the broadcast, take a look at this. I might also not necessarily last until midnight because I feel physically and mentally a little tired tonight. So I do apologize in advance if I have to take off and go. But I do want to talk about at least a few more pieces that surprised me, that have performed well. Since we were talking about the 6062, which again, I think it's a pretty exceptional reference. It is a reference distinguished by its rarity, especially well-preserved examples of it are quite aspirational, still, well, perhaps more than ever in demand with the increasing awareness how complicated pieces remain a rarity in Rolex's history. Now, of course, these pieces, perhaps in terms of the popular consciousness, have kind of lived under the shadow of variations of the Jean-Claude Killy, so to speak, the triple calendar chronograph. But that being said, for a mid-century design that also featured famously Rolex's waterproof oyster case, these pieces really represent the best of complicated Rolex, in the same way that a lot of 50s and 60s references when it comes to the Submariner, when it comes to the GMT Master, exemplify and embody the kind of standards that Rolex was going to set in terms of toolish and sporty watches for some decades to come. And as always, I think what distinguishes these kinds of examples that perform astonishingly well is the level of preservation. Right? You know, the fact that they have dials where the texture is still prominent and visible, where there are no marks of refinishing or relooming or modification, for that matter, where there is no significant trace of water or humidity ingress, and where there is no visible and excessive oxidization, right? This, whatever you can see here on the hands, is extremely minimal and well within the bounds of what is acceptable. Again, we looked at that 6062, which was quite a unicorn, so to speak, because it was part of the Bethune collection once upon a time. Because it was, again, in such an exceptionally well-preserved state. and perhaps also because it had that earlier version of the Stellina dial. And this particular example almost proved as successful as the pink gold version. The pink gold was lot 2051 of Passion for Time at Christie's Geneva, originally surfacing from the Bethune collection, parts of the Muhammad Zaman collection, the Passion for Time collection, which sold in excess of 2.2 million Swiss francs. This steel version of the reference 6062 which is roughly from the same time period, in this case 53, sold for 2.1 million Swiss francs, which once again is an exceptional hammer price for a watch that seems also exceptionally well preserved. If you look at the case, if you look at the dial, and I don't think it's a coincidence that that the 6062 was so extensively talked about and covered at Hodinky in advance of the auction, that it formed an important part of the discussion also in the Clymer Presents podcast. And I want to explain that a little more, because I'm not implying that just by talking about it, they're making it interesting, attractive, hot, etc. But I do appreciate that there are still people at Hodinky like Tony Traina, like what remains of Clymer, who are still keeping the pulse of the collectors community, hearing, learning, or knowing about what attracts them, what they aspire to. And I think they had their finger on the pulse. They have been right on point with highlighting, with underlining the appearance of the 60s, 62s in the auction circuit, on the market, and the two exceptional examples of this triple calendar moon phase indicator reference of a mid-century, of an early 50s Rolex watch, performed also exceptionally in terms of the prices they have realized. Lot number 3 of Sotheby's Important Watches 1, which was a full spec military submariner, Milsub reference 5517, of course, a Rolex from 1978. Of course, the broadsword hands, the spear-shaped center sweep seconds, the circle T at 6 o'clock, which identifies the luminous material on the dial and on the hands as tritium, and of course the fully graduated rotational dive timing bezel. All of these, in addition to the fixed lugs of the case, not to mention the issue numbers, identify this piece as a Milsub, as a military submariner. And that is a watch which, again, shot right through the high ceiling of the estimate and performed significantly better than what that relatively conservative estimates had predicted. The pre-auction estimate was set between 120,000 to 180,000 Swiss francs, and this lot sold for almost 500,000 in Swiss francs, namely 482,600 in Swiss francs. Another watch that outperformed all expectations. Once again, you might as well disregard the pre-auction estimates for this one, which was set between 10 to 20,000 in Swiss francs. This is a watch that, in this particular configuration, is not one of a kind. It's not a pièce unique, even though it is relatively rare. It is a pre-swatch Breguet, but not a so-called Daniel Roth era, because it comes from the mid-90s when Daniel Roth had long departed the brand in 1987, specifically when the Chomet brothers got themselves in trouble with the authorities and were almost taking Breguet down with them. Thankfully, Breguet was rescued by an investment firm after that, the Bahraini-based Investcorp, which made them profitable again. But that's a story for another time. Daniel Roth had already set off on his own path in 1988, where he started his journey as an independent, and by 1995 he was already in the process of selling that brand to the Singapore based dealer / company, the Hourglass. Anyway, so this is a piece, of course, that he had a hand in designing. This was a reference number that Daniel Roth had a hand in introducing, in terms of the 3037 and 3237 being two variations of a classic hand-wound bicompax chronograph by Breguet, housed in that classique case with an entirely fluted case band and extended teardrop-shaped lugs, with a dial that is made, that is fashioned from a gold blank, engine turned by hand, silvered, and a chronograph, of course, perhaps most importantly, on the Speedy Tuesday, a chronograph that was powered by the Mania CH27 base, which gave us, among other things, the Omega 321, which was in its turn the beating heart of the Moonwatch. So this is a piece that, beyond its specific dial, is not so exceptional, does not belong to an era of the brand that is necessarily gaining traction. You know, if it were a piece that was that was similar and that was from mid 80s rather than mid 90s, perhaps this would have made more sense. You could have connected it somehow to the newfound awareness in Daniel Roth as a pioneering independent watchmaker. You could have, somehow rationalized it after the facts by connecting it to the more recent revival of the Daniel Roth brand name by Louis Vuitton under the premises of La Fabrique du Temps. But the watch is none of those things. Although it is, I have to say, I have fallen in love with this watch the minute I saw it. It is a very attractive piece. It has at its center that signature Breguet dial, again, fashioned out of a gold blank, engine turned by hand, silvered. However, in this case, the hour track and the minute track is actually made out of lapis lazuli stone, and the Roman numerals as well as the details of the minute track are applied on that lapis lazuli outer track in silver, which is beautifully complementary, of course, to all the other parts of the dial, which are either in a shade of gray/silver or in the classic cornflower blue hue of the stainless steel handset, which was treated thermally to achieve that blue. And here's the movement. Which is Breguet's version of the Lemania CH27. Of course, still beautifully finished and with a swan neck regulator. Nevertheless, it was quite astonishing to see this lot number 30 for the Philips Geneva auction number 18 for November 3rd. A lot that was offered with no reserve and with a pre-auction estimate between 10,000 to 20,000 in Swiss francs. It was quite surprising for it to sell for almost 150,000, namely 146,050 francs. The other watch that I want to talk about before I switch to perhaps the online section of the Passion for Time auction is a watch that did not actually sell. You might remember that we talked a little bit about this watch. This is lot number 15 from the same auction, Sotheby's Important Watches Part 1. This is 1518 in pink, which is quite rare in and of itself. We know the reference 1518 as a pioneering piece of horological history. It was introduced in 1941 by Patek, and it was at the time the first serially produced perpetual calendar chronograph wristwatch. And it was, in fact, such an important feat of horological virtuosity and miniaturization that it took until 1986 for another maker to produce a perpetual calendar chronograph in series, and that was IWC with the Da Vinci in 1986. Imagine that. There were said to have been 281 examples of the 1518 produced between 1941 and 1954. The great majority of them were actually in yellow gold. There are 4 examples in stainless steel that have so far resurfaced in public sales and auctions. And I think there are about maybe 75 examples of the pink gold, I believe, overall. And certainly when it comes to this particular configuration, which to begin with features a pink dial, we are now talking about a much more rarefied realm where you have maybe about 14 different examples accounted for, a little more than a dozen. And of course, this was a piece that was actually made for a bracelet, an integrated bracelet example, which obviously makes this piece even more attractive. Of course, as it happens with a lot of these sorts of oddball watches, it was unfortunately adulterated in the sense someone did mess with its originality. So the watch actually in its lifetime was basically separated from that unique bracelet, this piece that has an empire case for an integrated bracelet was chopped off and was modified with lugs and a leather strap. However, the watch was restored in 2004 by Patek, and they added a bracelet back to it. However, I guess between that and the condition of the dial, which again is far from perfect, if not necessarily abused and undesirable, no one actually wanted to take this watch home. So the Clarine Mustad, the reference 1518R by Patek Philippe, which is a pink gold perpetual calendar chronograph piece with a pink dial and a matching bracelet, integrated bracelet, which had an estimated value that was set within the range between 2 million to 4 million Swiss francs. This watch ended up being unsold. Your friend Mikey, my friend Mikey, it's nice to see you. It has been a little while. My schedule has changed, but just wanted to say hi and show my support. Thank you for showing your support, Mikey. I appreciate you. So yeah, I wanted to note, even among those rare pieces that seem almost fail-safe at a certain point, if they are not ideal examples, if they are not examples that testify to that uh, high standard of being not only uh, unadulterated and unabused, but also unpolished, preserving, at least by and large, the larger outlines of a factory finish, clean and again unmolested dials, appropriate bracelet configuration, so on and so forth. When you have too many pieces of that puzzle missing, when even these sorts of unique pieces, perhaps especially these kinds of rare watches, don't check a lot of these boxes, which can present them as best in show, so to speak. They can, in fact, be completely ignored by buyers, which was the case for this pink gold perpetual calendar chronograph from Patek from around year 1944. All right, let me take a quick break here. I'm gonna go get some water. I'm also going to decide in that meantime, because I'm a little tired, whether I'm gonna continue, whether I'm gonna go at least until midnight. If you do want to encourage me in the meantime, at least hit the like button and leave some comments in the chats. Um, I don't know if you have any specific questions, if you have any particular requests, if there is an issue, an event, or a watch that you want me to cover tonight. Of course, it will be much appreciated if you send in that question, that topic with a super chat, and I will get back to it. And that would certainly encourage me to stay on at least until midnight. Let's see how we do. I'm going to go grab a cup of water, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Your friend Mikey, when is your next stream? I'll try and stomp through. Thank you, Mikey. It'll be at 8 p.m. on Thursday. So I don't think I will be back tomorrow, although things can change sometimes. Maybe I can make a surprise appearance, but I usually take Wednesdays off, as you guys know. And I am genuinely tired tonight, so maybe it's maybe it's appropriate to call it a night about now. I might just do that. But yeah, I will be back basically on Thursday, 8 p.m. my time, 8 p.m. in Los Angeles, PST, which will be 11 p.m. in New York, EST, and you can do the rest of the translations. All right, Z-Man 999. Thank you. I got the Blancpain swatch Indian Ocean affixed a Zealand rubber strap to it. Opinion, please. All right. Do you have a picture that we can take a look at, Z-Man? Do you wanna send it to me either via email or Instagram? This is my Instagram at young.brando. If you want to send a message there. Or you can most certainly send me an email. And we can take a look at that. But maybe I can find a generic picture. I mean, we can certainly find the Indian Ocean version. Something like this, I guess. Look, I mean, I want to be fair. I spoke about the thrifty fathoms before. I was, by the way, one of the first, if not one of the first people to guess that this was their next collaboration, all the way back when people were just catching up with the moon swatch craze. And I'm very happy, ultimately, that Jean-Jacques Fichte's original design has caught on in a very different iteration, of course, but at a popular level, right? That makes me really happy. That gives me a lot of joy, so to speak. But beyond that, honestly, I'm not a huge fan. Aesthetically, I don't have much of a problem with it. I just find the disjunction between what the watch actually is and how it's marketed to be a little unbearable for me. I'm particularly irked by the Save the Oceans angle, which I think is hardly achieved by bringing more plastic watches into this world, which have a lifetime that's less than a decade. To me, that's antithetical to the ethos of a mechanical watch, which is essentially a time machine, right? It is a vessel of not only craftsmanship and artisanship, or even memories, but also something that is precisely made to transcend its time and be delegated to, be trusted onto a new generation. System 51 may be a mechanical caliber, but it's not a caliber, I think, until now, that can be properly serviced. The best I heard about these particular series was that if it stops working, they may be able to change the entire movement, which still doesn't sound practical to me. So for me, aesthetically, this gets very high points because I love the design, because I love the fact that the original 50 Fathoms design reached a kind of audience which it never could have at the price points that Swatch Group's Blancpain offers it at this point. When it comes to the long-term desirability of the watch, I'm very lukewarm towards it. And that's really the kindest way I can put it. Burbing Hearts, they do look good, but young Brando is being consistent. That's good to see. Respect. Hey, man, that's, you know me. I actually stick to what I say, and not simply because I'm a stubborn person, because I usually form my opinions after thinking about this stuff at length. So when I come to a decision, when I actually say something in public, it is something that I thought about pretty carefully, and sometimes that I toiled over to a significant extent. So in this case, I've thought about it. I've made up my mind. I've still listened to people who have presented, differing viewpoints, and I respect it. But to me, it's just counterintuitive, right? I don't care whether System 51 is the right platform to offer this particular watch. I'm just puzzled by the suggestion that the public needs uh, what was it, an affordable dive watch? I mean, between Seiko and the dozens of micro brands that have been kickstarted in the last decade, I think the public has enough budget dive watches that come in every single flavor possible, and in fact, there are many of those 50 Fathoms inspired or 50 Fathoms clone versions of such dive watches as well. And they're not in plastic. and they are actually, full-blown mechanical watches which can be serviced and used for generations to come. Let me see if I got the email from Z-Man. Yes, Z-Man. Thank you so much. Let's bring up Z-Man's actual watch so we don't have to hunt for random stuff. That looks good. That looks good. And, that says a lot, because that Indian Ocean version was probably my least favorite among all the different editions, but that looks pretty good. Look, I mean, that's a cool watch to wear on a daily basis and bang about. And I'm saying this again as someone um, who has never really caught the appeal of plastic or bioceramic or whatever they call it these days. I'm not a big fan of that material, but I love the 50 Fathoms aesthetic. That rounded bezel is beautiful. I love the Arabics at quarters. As always, I'm not a huge fan of the date window. But otherwise, it's an interesting color. The classic Blancpain 50 Fathoms color scheme has been cloned and made into an homage so many different times. The blue gets predictable and, in a way, maybe too fashionable for its own good. The white one is interesting. This was my least favorite, but I think on that, black rubber strap, it looks actually like a very cool watch. Wear it in good health, man. It's not my thing, but I hope it makes you happy. Walter, thank you so much. $4.99. Can I talk about Jean prices? They seem stable. Look, what does it mean stable? We can take a look at some of the pieces that have come up, and let me pull up the ones that came up in Sotheby's, for example. I think the part of the question or issue that introduces a little bit of confusion is the experience of a genuine bubble, which we are just transcending, right? That was something we experienced really more broadly in the world of watches, but when it comes to FP Journe, especially in the last few years, it's been most significantly the case that there has been a mainstream attention in a way that was never present between the cash injection they received from Chanel and the post-pandemic craze that was inflamed also by the public relations campaign led by Mr. Wonderful. The pieces had started attracting almost universally market prices that were several times the retail. In the meantime, the retail prices have started catching up, certainly not to the extent that Philippe Dufour or Roger Smith adjusted their prices, almost pegging their prices to the hammer prices achieved at the auction circuit, but certainly the retail prices of FP Jaune pieces have been climbing up quite significantly in the last few years. The thing is, from the heights that these pieces have found, they seem to have fallen and perhaps stabilized. But I want to say one part that is misleading is you have an assortment here, for example, right, of a limited edition, an exclusive piece that was introduced in a 99-piece run for the opening of the Dubai boutique. A limited edition, again, of 100 pieces of chronomètre bleu that was introduced for the opening of the Beirut boutique. The two of the most desirable, most aspirational FP Jaune watches today, if any random individual walks into an FP Jaune boutique without knowing much about the brand, these would be one of the watches that they would ask for. They would either ask for a chronomètre bleu or they would ask for an elegant in 48 millimeters. So the prices that are achieved by these pieces on a public auction, I feel, can be quite misleading, and the fact that they actually seem to outperform the pre-auction estimates, I would say, is actually an anomaly more than that. I feel the way these two pieces, these two line sports pieces have performed is a lot more reasonable to me. And I think they will continue to fall. I'm not talking about the limited edition pieces. I'm not talking about brass movements pieces. I'm not talking about the Ruthenium series. I'm not talking about the boutique specials, the Octa Jour Nuit, Octa Chronograph, these kinds of pieces. But the kinds of pieces that you can still, with a reasonable lead time, attain through the boutique, I think these pieces on the secondary markets will continue to dip. As much as I cover the auctions here, I would highly recommend that you don't take hammer prices achieved at auctions as the only indicator of market value, precisely because of what I talked about earlier. I don't know if you were there yet, so I will repeat this. I think a lot of times the auction market is open to manipulation, not necessarily due to the bad faith of one or another entity, but because of the possibility that many different interest groups can collide and help boost the prices of the lots that they consign. So a lot of times when you see the hammer prices realized here on auction results, a lot of times you see the listing prices on Chrono24 or any other auction platform, any other multi-brand e-commerce platform. You have to take it for granted that they are inflated 10, 15, or 20%. You have to genuinely believe in the possibility that you might acquire these watches at much less than the prices that are advertised here, that are shown here. Right? The triptyque, for example, the collection of the 3 Vagabondage pieces. You know how this one sold? This one was bought by Mohammed Zaman, the same gentleman whose watches were sold for enormous sums of money right in the session before, especially thanks to that third-party guarantee that they snuck in on the day of the auction, which also caused the auction to start 45 minutes later. So since he sold so many watches for a total sum of, I think, more than 35 million Swiss francs, he just used his lunch money to get a unique set of these pieces. It's unreal. It's unreal. It's not a real market. I cannot deny the fact that the kind of prices achieved on the auction market affect the rest of the market, and that's what precisely opens them up for speculation. But we can't treat them as an incontrovertible marker of how these pieces trend for and how they should be sold for, how much they should be sold for on the secondary markets elsewhere. So I would, in fact, insist that they are not stable. They have been falling, maybe not as much as some of the other hype pieces, because I was also one of the people who was remarking and who was quite astonished by the fact that Jean continues to outperform so many other brands on the secondary market, but even they have started to slow down and in many instances dip in terms of the price points. So I would, if you are, it depends where you are in your, let's put it this way, in your collecting journey, right? If you are in the process of acquiring these watches, I would say remain patient, wait until the next year, and you will continue to see the trend downward. Stabilization is a very abstract, wishy-washy term. I'm sorry to say this, hopefully, no offense intended, but I find it a way of, I find this term being popularized by gray market dealers who have every interest in pretending that the prices are indeed stabilizing, because they're, as we speak, in the process of offloading a lot of the watches that they have accumulated over the years. I'll tell you this. In the previous auction seasons, Watchbox was aggressively going after every single FB Jaune piece that would be put up for auction by any auction house. I don't think this was the case this fall in Geneva. I know they were also offering incredibly generous buying prices on anything FB Jaune, but also Lange and, of course, De Bethune in the past. That seems no longer to be the case with Watchbox. Time will tell how the new merger or rearticulation of Watchbox as the 1916, what do they call it? 1916 company or 1916 project? The 1916 company. I'm not sure if that's going to spur them further on the secondary markets in acquiring these pieces, but I feel like their enthusiasm has been dampened significantly. This was the auction I was talking about, by the way. The World of FB Jaune in Eichen, Zurich, from August, September. It ended on September 1st, and there were all these pieces, even though they attracted a number of bids, there were all these pieces that didn't meet their reserves and that were thus not sold, precisely because the reserves were so high. Z-Man, thank you so much. $9.99. Sent you an email of my two-piece collection. Thoughts, please. Thanks. Let me see. All right. I like that Aquaterra. I like that Omega. I really like it. I like the Omega Aquaterra. I mean, that's a watch I feel that's very underrated. It's great for everyday wear. I like that twisted lugs case, and this particular version that in the way it connects to the bracelet. I love that ribbed dial design. I'm not a big fan of date windows, as you guys know, but this kind of vertical placement at 6 o'clock is one way of minimizing what I otherwise find an eyesore when they are at 3 o'clock or between 4 and 5. I would much rather do without them. And honestly, I find, I find this to be a nice casual um, combo in the way that the Aquaterra can be used for slightly more elevated occasions too, even though it's a very sporty watch as well. And the Thrifty Fathoms can be your watch to bang about in the when you're off the clock, or when you are, when you're just doing yard work in the weekend. And honestly, this juxtaposition also reminds me why the green version, why the Indian Ocean version is my least favorite, because that is a green watch. That's really green. It's too much for me. I think if I were actually a fan of the uh, Thrifty Fathoms, as I call them, if I were actually a fan, I think I would probably go for either the blue or white. I don't even know what they're called. I think the blue is Atlantic. The white, I don't really know. Whatever they're called, those are the ones that I like a little better. I think it's the Atlantic and the Antarctic or something like that. The green is, man, it's too green. I can't take it. And that's the standard strap on that Aquaterra, right? Yeah, I just think they're very underrated. I think those are very handsome looking. I'm not anti-green necessarily, but yeah, that's very green for me. I like darker shades of green, kind of pine green, hunter green. I appreciate the Hulk on other people's wrists, but it's never a watch that I would own. Even the 50th anniversary sub, the classic Kermit, even that sometimes is too much for me. Um, it's not necessarily my favorite color on watches, but that's a shade of green that's too much for me. I have, on the other end of the spectrum, for example, when we were going through the auction results, when we were previewing this auction, for example, right, the lot 32 of Christie's rare watches from yesterday as well, but a curation separate from um, the Passion for Time single owner collection. I just can't bear this. I know it's special. I know it's limited. I know it's only one of 99. Um, and I know green, especially in the region and in the Islamic world specifically, means something more. But I think this is just a very unattractive color for a watch. But I'm not saying this as if it were, a dictum, as if it were, something more than my personal opinion, something more than the expression of my personal taste. So again, whether it is something as rare and as unique as this, which costs 126,000 in Swiss francs apparently, or simply the Indian Ocean version of the Blancpain Swatch collaboration. I'm just not a big fan of green watches. The darker, the better, but still, it's not my favorite. The green Aquaterra looks nice, but even the new Seamaster, with the green dial, that's not my thing either. Let me pull up. Yeah, it's fine. The green Aquaterra. I think honestly, it looks more. It looks more like gray for me than anything. But yeah, this is a nice shade of green. I would wear this. Hey, Gundog. Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding everyone to upvote. That Jean is pea green. Yeah, I mean, I want to remain respectful overall, but it's not my taste at all. This I kind of like. It has that subtlety to it that really attracts me. But even when it comes to the Diver 300M, the green version of it, to me, it's not the most attractive. Even though, again, I like how it's relatively muted compared to how it could have been. The green Aquanauts, I'm also not a fan. I think the 5167 is the ideal size. To me, that represents the ideal proportions. For me, the 5168 is too big. But then again, that's purely personal preference as well. And it's because I have a puny wrist, nothing else. Otherwise, both of these watches are very attractive. I can see how, in fact, the larger case size and the substance that the white gold brings to the table, as well as its subtlety, is precisely what makes the 5168G so attractive in both of its variations to most collectors. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of either one of those pieces. I would much rather, if I had to pick something, I would much rather pick the good old 5168. But ultimately, contemporary Patek is not really my thing. There are a few different models that I like, but they are either quite niche or basically discontinued in the way that I like them in the particular combination. But yeah, otherwise, it's not really my thing to begin with. Absolutely. I think it is too hyped. Not necessarily. There are a few things at 41 millimeters that wear nice. I like the Chopard Alpine Eagle, which is technically 41 millimeters on paper. Um, I'm not a big fan of the overseas as a design, but I like how it wears. I like how it sits on the wrist. I think that's either 41 or larger as well. Um, I have some cushion-shaped divers by Seiko, which on paper, my King Turtle is certainly larger than 40 millimeters, I'm sure. I don't know exactly what the measurements are, not off the top of my mind anyways. But I think that should be larger than 40. And I wear that, almost every day in the gym, and I love it. I really enjoy it. Okay, turns out it's 45 millimeters in diameter and 47.7 lug to lug. So, it depends on the design. It depends on the particular model. When it comes to the Aquanauts, with all the variations I have tried, the 5167 sits best on my wrist. Like, as another example, when you think about it, the new Breguet Type 20, which I think it's 42, right? That to me is unbearably big, inexcusably big. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, well, that's not necessarily because it's objectively too big, because there's no such thing as an objectively small or objectively large watch. But I'm wearing my Revival Type 20 now. For me, the main attraction of this watch is the fact that it is 39 millimeters. That it offers that option among iconic, classic, self-winding chronographs, especially, that have some sort of provenance. And among those designs, this is the one that has the kind of proportions that are much more conservative, especially if you compare it with Speedmaster Professional. So I was extremely disappointed when I saw the new Type 20 was bloated up to 42. And reference 3800, which is the older Type 20 Aeronaval, even if it wears bigger than 39, it certainly doesn't wear like the 42, which the new 2057 and 2067 most certainly wears. Thank you, by the way, for another super chat. This is the carbon composite with the blue dial, isn't it? Let me see. Is it this one? Yeah, see, I mean, that's the other thing. I'm so glad you brought up Panerai, because if I were to buy a Panerai piece, it has to be 44 or 47 millimeters. I don't care whether my wrist is too small. I honestly don't care whether it looks proportionate on my wrist. This is supposed to be larger than life masculine, beastly piece on your wrist. So it's Panerai is a good representation of uh, having sort of the poetic license of wearing a bigger watch because it's meant to be big, just as a classical dress watch is meant to be small. It's meant to be discreet. It's meant to a large extent, disappear on your wrist, right? It's supposed to slip under your cuff and spend most of the night away from prying eyes. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have watches like the IWC Big Pilot. You have watches like classic Panerai, 47, 44 millimeters, and watches that are supposed to be the center of attention, worn at the end of your wrists and in the biggest size you can get away with. Um, I'm getting more and more accustomed to carbon fiber cases, carbon composite materials. Uh, Depending on the price point, I think they offer a very interesting look, tactical, kind of a blacked out, murdered out uh, aesthetic. Here, I like the fact how it's counterbalanced by this matte blue, dark blue dial. I think they call it blue abisso. I like it, and it's beautifully matched with that sort of matte blue strap rather than something black again, which would have made it a very grave affair. Yeah, I completely agree with with that statement, Z-Man. They're supposed to be macho pieces. So, if you want to wear an IWC Big Pilot, you wear a Big Pilot. You don't get the, smallest version possible. It just doesn't make sense. At least to me. That's why I wanted to say, I'm not a 40 millimeter or bust person. Um, I like pieces that are smaller if they are appropriate for the occasion and for the genre of the watch. And in the same way, you know, I can make exceptions for pieces larger than 40 if they are designed in a way, maybe with certain contours that it fits my wrist better, or if they are supposed to be big, supposed to be larger than life. Walter, going back, in Eichen doesn't sell much of anything. True, to a certain extent, right? If you compare the the amount of lots they sell to Philips, for example, which for the first time in almost 3 years failed to sell one lot, right? Otherwise, they had this seemingly impossible track record of white glove sale after white glove sale. So compared to such extremes, you might say in Eichen doesn't sell much. But I don't know. I rest my case. I think even the FP Jean hype at this point started to die down. I guess we can go back and forth and I might bicker about whether they have actually stabilized or not. Um, and I won't advise you one way or another if you are actually sitting on a few pieces that you are willing to sell. So you don't have to listen to me. I'm not going to say try to sell them to the best price you can get. Don't listen to me. I'm not going to advise anyone to do that. But if you are in the process of collecting, if you are aspiring to some jaune pieces, again, I'm not talking about the first few series of the tourbillon. I'm not talking about, the subscription pieces. I'm not even talking about the brass movements. I'm not talking about anything limited. But when it comes to pieces that you can more or less still find in their catalog, in versions that are not all that different from what they used to make in the past, I strongly believe that the prices will continue to fall. I'm not saying that they will necessarily be at the retail price points by next year, but I can assure you, I understand from stabilizing, they will remain the same, whereas they will continue to fall. That's all I can say. So I can't. Oh, my largest piece. That has to be my king turtle, which is 45. So my largest piece is in fact my SRPE 05. Yeah, because otherwise I have my classic, 4 and 5 digit Rolexes, which are more around 38, 39 rather than 40. I have my Type 20, which is, 39 millimeters, at least on paper. I have my dime size, 40s Lemania chronograph. I have my Universal Genève from 40s with the so-called jumbo stainless steel case. That's 37. My Daniel Roth is, I think, around 35 technically, but that's, as you know, a very unique case shape, the so-called double ellipse or ellipsocurvex. My JLC Grand Dates is, as you know, or you might not know, it's a slightly larger case than the traditional Grand Thai, which was introduced in the 60th anniversary of the design. The Grand Dates I remember 12 millimeters thick and 29 by 46.5, I want to say. Whereas the Grand Thai, which has kind of become more or less mainstream or common after the 90s with the JLC Reverso, that is around 42 by 26 millimeters. Did I forget anything? Oh yeah, these are more or less my pieces. The Merci LMM01 Alessandro, that's a 38 millimeter. yeah, that covers pretty much all. They're all under 40, it turns out, except for my Seiko diver stuff, which are a little larger, but because of the design, because I wear them so casually, because they are my, gym watches, Rite Aid run, CVS run, jogging, hiking. I don't know, because I wear them so casually, I don't even pay much attention of what the case size is. But yeah, if I were actually interested in the Panerai that you just showed, for example, I would most certainly go for 44 or even 47, because that's what makes sense for the feel of that particular watch. Just like I much prefer a dress watch that is around 36, 37 millimeters to a dress watch that is 40, 41. Not that one is better or worse, just that to me, a smaller watch conveys the ethos of a dress watch better than a piece that's 41 millimeters and that looks ostensibly like a dinner plate on your wrist. Whereas you can find another person who thinks of the IWC Portuguesa as an exemplary instance of traditional elegance. And I respect that, but it doesn't captivate me in the same way. In fact, I can't stand it, even though as a design on paper, it's very appealing and quite beautiful in its simplicity, but too big for me, for the most part. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it a night now because I feel like I'm rambling. I do appreciate you, Walter and Z-Man, for your super chats, for your contributions, for your questions, especially. Everyone else in the chat, I really appreciate your support and presence. Hit the like button. Leave a comment if you would like after the stream ends, because that helps a great deal as well. That really does help boost the channel quite significantly. So if you have anything good or bad to say, a question to ask, a point to contest, taking it to the comment section is always the best cure for that. It's the best solution to that. If you want to contribute to the channel, you know how, and the links are in the video description. Of course, super chats, super stickers, super thanks that you can add to your comments are always absolutely welcome as well. If you want to stay in touch, connecting with me on Instagram is your best bet. So feel free to do that. I've just dropped the link. And if you would like to, again, give me your suggestions or have any requests for future content, which you can, of course, commission, your best bet is, again, reaching me either either on Instagram or through the email address that I have on my YouTube page here, and that is right there in the chat too. So feel free to follow me on Instagram and write to me there, or you can also email me at youngbrando, one word, .wns@gmail.com. That's youngbrando.wns@gmail.com. But it's all there in the chat. So if you click, I'm sure it will be much easier to copy the link and write to me. I'm basically passing out at this point. It's been a long day, and it's going to be a long day for me tomorrow as well. But I can't wait to be back with you on Thursday. We can tie up some loose ends from today and also take a look at the online pieces, at the remainders of the Passion for Time auction, the single owner collection, Mohammed Zaman's collection that was part of this interesting debacle as part of the fall auction season in Geneva. We'll go back to talking about that on Thursday. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, wear your watches and enjoy them. And feel free to stay in touch in the comments below or writing to me via email or on Instagram. Thank you for your presence and support. And thank you especially to Z-Man and Walter for the super chats. I'll see you soon.